Okay, good morning, everyone. My name's Gary Dunow. I'm with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I really appreciate the PyData folks letting us have a slot to speak here at the conference. The first thing you'll probably notice is I have no slides, and there will be no equations and no coding in my speech. I'm not a data science person. I'm actually a self-professed Luddite, and I make that profession on purpose because I don't want to, as a person who's been in a position of leadership within our agency and the government, I think it's very dangerous to get to the point where you think you know enough to make a decision in a technical area where you have a bunch of smart people around you who can provide you better information or better data. So I try to leave that to the people who really know what they're doing. The reason I don't have any charts today is because I really want to talk to you about culture and the culture around what we call the data occupation within our agency and the culture of leaders' mindsets in making decisions. So I'm going to assume that everyone at this event knows that people who make decisions without data aren't really always making the best decision. In fact, behavioral psychologists have proven over time that although we think we're really good decision makers, when we make decisions without data, we almost always make the least optimized decision that we could make. And because I've been in positions to make decisions both in financial and human resources, as well as risk-based decisions based on operations, I think it's really exciting where our agency is going with regards to the data occupation and the technology and capabilities and systems that we're bringing in to support data-driven decisions within our agency. So let me tell you first a little bit about me. So I'm a retired Air Force officer and joined the agency in 2002. So I've been with the agency for about 15 years in a number of different leadership positions. Some of those have been operations organizations where we deployed units overseas to different locations for a lot of different reasons, both DoD, Department of Defense support and combat operations, but additionally humanitarian assistance support such as the Ebola crisis in West Africa. My most recent job before my current job, I was the director of analysis, where we make recommendations or provide advice to government decision makers across the full spectrum of the government so that they can make decisions. And we always try to provide the best advice we can based on the data that we have. But one thing, if anybody in the audience has been in government will know, most of the people who rise to the position of decision maker in government are generally type A people who think they know everything they need to know about making decisions in the environment they're in because that's how they got to where they are. And I found a couple years ago, I was sitting in a panel at Georgetown University on big data, and a reporter from the New York Times asked me a question about what we were doing with data, because we spent a lot of time in the last couple of years structuring a lot of our data and building up systems that allow us to use data differently. And he said, as a government leader, how are you going to ensure that the data is the appropriate data and structured and formatted in a way that allows you to make the best decision? And the only response I could give him is, I'm going to have to trust the data and the people who we bring into the agency to wrangle the data, to structure the data engineers, our data scientists, to make sure that I'm getting the data in a way that makes sense for the problem that we're trying to solve. That's not the mindset that most bureaucratic decision makers have. I remember when I was in the Air Force talking to a general officer about a decision one time based on imagery that we had received, and the general made me go get the imagery and show it to him so that he could interpret the image himself in order to make a decision. Because when you get down to those kinds of decisions, where there are grand strategic policy decisions or life or death decisions based on an operation, a lot of times the individual making that decision will only trust the data if he or she sees it. And we all know in today's environment, we're not going to be able to see all the data. So you're going to have to trust the data. So I've got experience based on both my military time and my time serving as a government civilian, that have allowed me to change my mindset, but that isn't necessarily prevalent throughout the rest of the government. So it's important for me to find a way to help change the culture and get people to make decisions differently. And our agency is doing a lot to drive in that direction, investing a lot in, I heard the keynote speaker this morning talking about some of the technologies. So we've invested a lot in containerization to build algorithm libraries. We've invested a lot in Python and building coding skills and trying to get most of our agency what we call data savvy, or at least understanding what data can do for you. So what is NGA for those that don't know? The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency is a member of the intelligence community in the Department of Defense, and we provide advice to decision makers in order to prevent problems from happening. That's our main objective. We need data to do that. Typically, when people think about geospatial intelligence, they think about imagery. They think of the satellites that take imagery, but imagery is just the foundation layer of geoanalysis. Everything that happens in the world happens someplace at some time. So it's geospatially and temporally rectified in order to provide a piece of data. And all that data pulled together helps us find things out and learn things and make decisions. Most of you probably know what GPS is, or Google Earth, or use nav systems in your car. Those are investments that NGA has made throughout our history that the commercial side has turned into commercially viable products, but we use to bring in data to our agency. Among those, in addition to Google Earth and GPS, are commercial imagery companies like Digital Globe that a lot of people use to find unclassified data to help make decisions. So we support national security and humanitarian efforts. I'll give you a couple examples of how things happened a while ago, talking 10 plus years ago, that have also helped shape my mindset and helped me try to drive towards a different approach. One example is when we, after 9/11, we had units going in and out of countries conducting operations, and the intelligence units that went in to support them would come in with their own data, drop in for a period of time, 6 months to a year, and then leave with their data, and another unit would come back in, and essentially wiping the history of what happened in that place over the course of that 6 months or year for the next unit that was coming in, and they had to start all over. Because we couldn't find a way to make the data accessible to everyone to allow us to make smarter decisions or understand things over a longer period of time. So through technology and architecture, we were able to solve that solution, or solve that problem. Another example is the Ebola crisis, which I talked about earlier. So we worked with the units that were going over there to support from the Department of Defense side to help them understand where were the best places to put the Ebola treatment units in order to make sure we were having the biggest impact possible on that crisis. That required us to look at a lot of data in order to make those decisions. And because of that event in particular, our director, Robert Cardillo, in 2014, for the first time made all of our data available on the World Wide Web. So that marks a significant shift in our agency's approach to be able to put things out on a completely unclassified environment. The reason we needed to do that is there are so many people, let me change that, not needed to do that, preferred to and chose to do that, is there were so many people that needed that information that didn't have access to our architecture, and we didn't have access to their data. And this just left a huge gap from a mission perspective in making sure we were able to support the needs of the humanitarian organizations, the non-governmental organizations, Red Cross, and those types of organizations to be able to make the best decisions. So we have a lot of data within the agency and a lot of data coming in all the time. As a matter of fact, the amount of data that's coming in is getting to be more than we can possibly handle. We've moved from hunting within one image for the perfect piece of information to help us about that moment in time and that place on Earth, to trying to create coherence from a flood of data that's coming in all the time through different sources. Some of it classified and some of it unclassified, but it's a lot of data. And we're starting to think about how we develop models of things that happen around the world in order to get predictive and be able to address a problem before it happens. So how much data are we talking about? We have a conference once a year called the GeoInt Symposium, and our director spoke there last month. And he believes we're standing where the SIGINT community stood when the internet became the digital fabric of the planet. We really think geospatial information is about to be that next fabric of the planet in how we approach data. And whether it's a persistent view from space or air or ground or even the sea, in 5 years there's probably going to be 1 million times more data than we have right now and are unable to get through all of it right now. So just for comparison's sakes, if we were to try to manually look at all the data, all the commercial satellite data that's coming in today and that we expect to have over the next 20 years, we would need 8 million analysts to take a look at that. Now that's a lot more than we'll ever have. So we need to find a way to automate things and find other technology solutions. And that's all in HD. We have so much data right now, we can't take advantage of it all. We simply can't look at it all, we can't organize it all, we can't visualize it all, we can't use all the data that we have. So we have to focus the resources we have on the very hardest problems and find ways to work with other organizations. So it's a nexus for innovation for us on how we manage and use our data to answer analytic questions. We have taken some steps in structuring and standardizing data sets and spatially enabling them from non-GeoInt sources such as open source information, new press, and those kinds of things. Large integrated multi-source data enables types of correlation, alerting, and forensic analysis that has resulted in discoveries of new systems, new insight, and new detail on relatively well-known targets, and an ability to ferret out patterns of life and observable activities of some of the hardest intelligence targets. However, even though we've made progress in structuring and standardizing the data sets, we still haven't realized the full extent of what big data analysis can do for us. We need to spend more on algorithm development, on automation. This has been a decades-long problem for us that we've been trying to solve with significant investment, and get to spatial temporal processing of remote sensing data that allows our analysts to focus on the really difficult challenges. We're working with key partners in academia, in several universities, as well as in R&D organizations to try to achieve this. What we'd like to do is distill down all the data into meaningful insights, predictions, and other bits of information. This isn't unique to the intelligence community. We've heard speakers this morning talk about how they're trying to do that for investments for their organizations, for how to help match people to a vacation home, et cetera. They're all the same problems when it comes to the data perspective. Ultimately, we'd like to make the systems a tool for our analysts so they don't have to spend so much time working on the data and getting it right, but using the data to answer questions, have easier and better tools for interacting with the data, open up our systems so they have more access to data across the government. In fact, about 2 years ago, Senator Warner from Virginia wrote a letter about how just basically screwed up the geospatial information is across the government. Now, I'm not talking specifically about our agency, this is government-wide. A lot of municipal and state governments have done a good job of bringing their data together to help make decisions on infrastructure systems and investment decisions from a state and local budget perspective. But within the federal government, because there are so many different agencies with so many different stores of data that's all treated and handled and used in different ways, it really is kind of a mess. That's one way to put it. I'd describe it as a huge opportunity for us to be able to bring all that data together and help the government make better decisions. We need systems and algorithms to correlate that data and find needles in haystacks, and capabilities that go beyond and answer specific questions. The cultural challenges are the hardest, and I think even at our own agency they're the hardest, but I think we're ahead of everybody else because our leadership has made investments in these capabilities, including what I mentioned earlier, some pilot projects with containerization and approaches to data science. It's going to take a big effort to change this culture, though, and be able to use a multitude of sources and large volumes of data. We're investing a lot in training and resources for our analysts to familiarize them with and equip them to make sense of all the data, but we're not going to be able to tackle those big data problems alone. We need close partners with industry, academia, and research and development organizations. Now, most of what I've talked about so far has been what we call mission data. So that's the imagery or data about things that happen in places on the earth. But we also have a challenge within government and within our own agency on what I call the corporate data side. So this is, how do you use the dollars that the taxpayers have given us through Congress to the greatest effect? And how do you use the people who work in the agency to the greatest effect? So we've actually started structuring all of our corporate data in a way that helps us make smarter decisions and determine what the return on investment is from those decisions. And we've seen some shifts in our leadership in how they make those decisions, from listening to people who have really good sales pitches about really good potential outcomes based on an investment, to listening to our data folks who have pulled the data together in a way that those decision makers haven't seen before. We use Tableau a fair amount for a lot of our HR decisions, and we're starting to look at different ways to look at our financial decisions using different tools. So we're trying to start a new conversation across different entities to make sure we're getting the best and the brightest input. That doesn't necessarily mean people coming to work for us. We want that, but it also means people working with us. So we have programs with universities like Penn State and George Mason and other major universities that work specific projects with us using unclassified information. So, and when I say unclassified, it's different than what I heard unclassified in the previous conversation. I'm assuming that's understood. But we're trying to find ways to open up our data and take as much data as we have and do what we did with the Ebola crisis. Just put it out there for people to use and help us, from a crowdsourcing perspective, solve some problems. So we're standing up a program we call Engage, where we're sending some of our folks out to universities or companies to work in those environments and help get up to speed on the current state of technology and capabilities, but also to bring people into our agency for short periods of time to bring their capabilities and their knowledge and experience into NGA to help us understand how we can do things better. We've also built outposts in different locations. We have one in Silicon Valley, where we have a couple of folks who are sitting there with startups and other corporations to try to understand what's the current state, help us have those conversations, and decrease the gap between what the current state is outside of government and the current state of technology and capabilities inside the government. We also put one in New York City. We have one in St. Louis, which is our second largest location, where we're working with some pretty major IT companies to be able to teach our folks and get our folks some experience. We've also come up with what we call a data investment process. This is part of the culture change for the agency. The process is actually pretty straightforward, but it's a little out of the ordinary for the government. So the first rule of the process is we break the assumed rules of the intelligence community. So the assumed rules are, we have our information and our data and we don't share it with anybody outside of the intelligence community because you don't have a need to know, or you don't have the architecture that we want you to work with it on. But we know that a lot of that data can be used outside of our architecture and with other people. So the data information doesn't have to be kept secret, not all of it, just what needs to be. We can't solve our problems alone, so we need help to do that. And that was something we determined we needed to come out and ask for help with. So the first thing we're going to do is find the data inside NGA that we can use to invest in this way. And that's why we need more data savvy, more data experienced folks to come in and help us work with that. We're working on that right now, and that's what I would call the hard but straightforward part of the problem. Once we have that data, we would call that our capital in place, we can form our investment fund to invest in this capital. That might come in the form of asking co-investors to chip in their own data so that we can work together on problems. So imagine NGA and the Air Force, or NGA and Google, or NGA and Grubhub, working on a problem together to co-invest. That's very similar to the approach we've taken in the past. I mentioned GPS and Google Earth and Digital Globe. Same kind of approach, but that was not with data. That was about technology. This is now about data, and we're uniquely postured and uniquely experienced to be able to do that. So we're looking for companies and investors who have the skill and talent and want to work with us that way. We realize that's not everybody. We are the intelligence community. We know some people don't want any attachment with that, but we also know there are a lot of people who want to serve their government without putting on a uniform or necessarily getting a government job. And this provides an opportunity to help serve directly with our organization. So we're looking for a company that's looking to build change detection algorithms. We have a huge amount of data that we can provide to train and test your algorithms to help refine them. Or a company interested in looking at, for example, hyperspectral imagery and what we can find from that using different data approaches. We have a lot of experience in this area, and we can work together to both entities' benefits. It wouldn't be a contract. That's another thing that's different about this approach. So in the government, it takes a long time to get a contract in place and execute it. And usually by the time you get all that done, the problem is moved on to a different stage or has even disappeared. But this approach wouldn't be a contract. It wouldn't necessarily involve the exchange of money. It might not have a specific requirement. Rather, it would be an investment that both sides would make to find the right team and the right ideas to solve the problems that help both sides grow the investment that they make in the problem. If data is the new oil, this is a catchphrase we have now. We want these companies to go make petrochemical products, right? Turn it into plastic and build something for us. Turn it into a change detection algorithm or into a crazy new way to use hyperspectral imagery or a new automated way of labeling objects in images, which is something that we may have never considered before. You know, we work in talking about culture again, a very homogeneous environment that we're trying to break down. We realize that homogeneity of the people that the government attracts doesn't allow us to take the right approaches to every problem. And so we're trying to open that up and get more diversity of thought in the way we approach our problems. So in exchange for our investment in that type of arrangement, we'd like a return on that investment. So in this case, for us, the return looks like better data and better technology, some value added to what we started with and put into the investment. That's our return. So if a company does come up with a great change detection algorithm, then we can feel free to use it and share it, and they can sell it commercially, and we both win. We just want to be able to use it inside. We think this is a win-win because NGA gets new and innovative technology, and that gives us a competitive advantage against those who are trying to create those problems that we're trying to prevent, and the investors and inventors get a competitive edge of their own. So our goal is to drive innovation and create a culture of innovation, especially around data and the data occupations within our agency. Ultimately, it's to ensure we're able to better carry out our missions, and that can be mutually beneficial. So we want to unlock the power of all the data that we have, and we know we're just at the tip of the iceberg in trying to do that right now. So with that, we have a sense that we want it to be more than just about innovation for NGA and for the GEOINT community. We want it to be about results and mission outcomes. So we're looking to people like you and to organizations that you represent and companies that you represent to partner with us and to join with us in addressing the problems that the nation needs to solve. And with that, I'll stop and take some questions if anyone has any. Yes, ma'am.
So for the classified data, so are you allowed to tell us what the domain the data is in? I'm not nosy. I'm just trying to figure out what NGA does.
So I'll start at the end with what NGA does.
Okay.
So we do look at all sources of data, but our primary mission is looking at imagery. So whether it's from satellites, government satellites, or commercial satellites, or aircraft, drones, et cetera, that are taking pictures or video or whatever of the Earth. but we also take in all kinds of other form of data to try to determine what's happening at a specific place at a specific time and answer some questions about, for example, in the news this weekend, right, North Korea launched a missile. So we're trying to make sure we're preventing our enemies from being able to have a capability to strike the United States. That's one of our mission areas. I mentioned the Ebola mission earlier. So one of our other key missions is understanding the Earth. And what that usually has to do with is what we call safety of navigation. So making sure aircraft and ships and vehicles can transit wherever they need to transit safely without running into each other or things, et cetera. And so in the case of the Ebola mission, we used that side of our mission area to understand where the Ebola treatment units could go, what the terrain was like, so how fast could people get to the units if they got sick, those kinds of things. So, and we do work on a number of different domains. Most of them are internal domains to the agency or to the intelligence community. So, did I answer your question?
Yes. What would you say, like the percentage of classified data and unclassified data?
Yeah, so I would say we have some folks here who are smarter than I am on that, so I'll ask them to correct me, but probably 90+% of our data currently is kept in a classified domain. 90+%. However, that doesn't mean that much of that data is classified. And that's what I was trying to get at through this discussion is I think a lot of that data can actually be openly shared. It's because of security policies and regulations and laws that we aren't able to do that right now. But we have started challenging those laws and policies in a way that allowed us, for example, during the Ebola crisis, to share information out on the World Wide Web.
So I'm kind of curious about collaboration between you all and the other intelligence agencies. Are the other intelligence agencies more customers of both like the data and the analysis and the products that you're building, or is the data kind of thrown over the wall and they're building their own tooling? I'm curious like how much sharing of like, you've built all these great tools to analyze the data, how much sharing there is between you and the other intelligence agencies?
Again, and I'll ask for help. It's a combination. We do provide a lot of our specific data to other agencies for them to synthesize with other information from other agencies. But because of the nature of our data, we actually can answer a lot of questions. In some cases, we're the only data that exists. In other cases, because it's all geospatially and temporally rectified, we can answer the questions that we normally throw the data over the fence to others to answer. So it's a combination of the two. But there is a lot of collaboration going on.
Hey, so you mentioned that you guys do collaborations with like universities. What kind of problems are you looking to solve with universities, like research areas, right?
So there are a lot of different ones. I think the most prominent one currently is illegal wildlife trafficking. We have a huge effort against that, that one of our officers is leading, working with a number of different universities. But we look at a lot of different problems. For example, where to make investments in infrastructure in developing countries, those kinds of things. So we're open to anything.
And most of the domain knowledge is imagery, I guess, or?
No, so we have, again, we bring in folks who have domain knowledge, for example, in a country or a region or in a technology. For example, we have a lot of engineers who work as analysts, looking at R&D of other systems and those kinds of things. So it's a mix.
Okay, so I'm also in academia. So how do I get in touch with somebody from, say, the Geospatial Agency to? So
we have a table out here with some folks that can give you a contact number if you have a specific problem you want to work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Get your hand up.
Hey, so I know you mentioned you're kind of a Luddite, but I was wondering if you had any kind of big picture ideas on how the intelligence community or other government organizations can support the tooling that's used primarily in the open source by both you guys and other people.
Yeah, so I say Luddite, and that might be a bit of an overstatement. I'm that deep, okay? And you need to at least understand technology to lead some folks, but then trust them and their answers. But we have made investments already and have done some things. For example, we're on GitHub with some of our algorithms, right? So we're trying to find ways where we can be out there and be more open and transformative. Like I mentioned during the talk, we're looking for other ways we can do that, right? We're in GitHub because we had somebody in the agency who knew about GitHub and said, hey, we should go do this. We've made the investment in containerization with Dockers and Mesos because we took a trip out to the West Coast and someone said, hey, we should do that. So we just need people to tell us how we can do more of that. Does anybody want to add anything? Yeah, good. All right.
I just wanted to ask, is there a way an individual could be involved in this Engage program?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that hasn't come up, but our approach to all of this is why not? So I would say, again, get with the folks at the booth, and we have a person in charge of that program. They can put you in touch with her. Okay.
Any more questions? Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.